In this section, I'm going to take a look at shadows and light and how they affect the appearance of form. The way you understand light and shadow will have a huge bearing on your work, and once you start to see the shapes of shadows and the highlights and start to work them into your drawings, that's when you'll see a big difference in how your drawings come together. It's true that shadows have a definite form themselves, that if you see and draw that can have a similar effect to drawing the negative spaces of an object. So shadows can define a form. But as a word of advice, you should always remember that you're drawing the form and not the shadow. In other words, I don't want you to get too caught up in shading and shadows to the point where your drawing ends up looking very flat but has a ton of very laboured shading and cross-hatching. That kind of overemphasis on shading can really spoil an otherwise beautifully observed piece. Instead, you should just trust what you see and what you know about what you're looking at. Remember that you're always drawing the form even when you're drawing the shadows of it. For example, this round form here has got quite a straight line of a shadow, but looking at the form, I know this to be a completely and perfectly rounded shape. The cross contour here is round, it's not flat. Also remember, shadows and highlights can sometimes dazzle the eye because of the stark contrasts. And then when you reproduce them exactly, they tend to make the drawing look a bit unrealistic. So when in doubt, always remember that what you're studying is actually the shape of the form, and then you can proceed with your shading. Usually, when it comes to light and shadow, there are three main things that you can draw: a highlight, a mid-tone, and a dark tone. On a sphere such as this one, you've got a highlight, then you've got a crest shadow, which moves progressively from the highlight through the mid-tone to the dark tone. And then you've got a cast shadow. Round about here on the cast shadow and here on the crest shadow would be the darkest spots. That's where the falling light is most completely blocked. This spot here is the brightest, it's the highlight. On a sphere like this, it's easy to see one other component of shadows, and that's the reflected light. So that's any light that's gotten around the edges of the form and it's hit the ground and bounced back up. That's why, very confusingly, in the middle of the darkest part of the shadow, you'll always see this tiny little bit of light. But not all shadows move slowly and progressively in such an even way. In the next tutorial, I'll explain how light falls on planes and how that defines the edges of form.